studying this topic, we have found that there is a ton of information out there as well on like the employees of the future, how to make yourself the best employee, um, what skill sets are you going to need, and those sorts of things. We cannot cover everything that is part of this topic today during a 1-hour webinar, including things like hiring practices. But I hope as part of this webinar, one of the takeaways that you'll get is this idea of what kinds of people should you be looking for, more of the softer skills things, besides, what kinds of Microsoft Office skills or other technical skills they might have. But what kinds of soft skills and behaviors are you looking for in people that you want to work with or have on your teams? This webinar is recorded, and you will have the opportunity to view the webinar afterwards. It'll be on our webinar page off of our website. You can click on it from our homepage the same way you did probably when you registered for the webinar, as well as you have the opportunity to ask questions, and there's a questions button that you can ask your questions of. We will probably not do questions today. We have back-to-back webinars going on here in our office and have another one that starts at the same time as this one is supposed to end. So we're going to have this one run a little bit short just so we can transition over. But we will answer all of your questions. So please ask your questions using the questions button, and I will answer all of those questions to everybody who has attended today at the conclusion of the webinar. Secondly, everybody who's attending will receive this week a certificate of attendance, and that way you can get your 1 hour of credit for attending this webinar for any things that you might need for certification or anything else. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the challenges anytime you're talking about any topic is kind of setting the boundaries or setting the parameters of what we're talking about today. And the topic is personal resilience and how, your employees or your workforce, how you can increase the resilience of those people. And it really gets down to each person. And there's a lot of different definitions, but this is the definition that we decided to use for this webinar, which is a person's capacity. Remember, a capacity is different than a capability, but their capacity to handle difficulties, to handle demands, and to handle high pressure without becoming stressed. And so stress is going to be one of the topics or the threads that you're going to see throughout this webinar. And I don't mean stress in a manner like, everybody has stress. But without becoming so stressed that you can't actually function or that you can't work at the potential that you need to be working at. So that's what we're looking at when we're talking about stress. I always like to start a webinar. Usually I start with something in the news. There wasn't really anything in the news in the last couple of weeks, so I went instead and looked at what are some common themes that have to do with personal resilience? And obviously there's a ton of work, usually from the psychology side and psychiatric side, which is why do some people break while others thrive in adversity? There's also a lot of work done on the sociology side of this. But one of the things I was interested in, I saw as a common theme through a lot of the papers, is that resilience is less about who you are and more about how you think. So consider that also. And then I really liked this quote. Of course, it's similar to the first one, but adversity causes some men to break and others to break records. How do you respond to adversity, and how do you respond to change? And this psychiatrist, Stephen Wolin, describes resilience as, again, the capacity to rise above adversity. And when something goes wrong, you must manage to stay in control rather than letting the situation take over, and that your thoughts shape your perceptions and behavior. And this kind of goes back to that other thought about not necessarily who you are, but how you think. I always like these signs, keep calm and whatever, but keep calm and carry on, I believe, was the first one. And one of the things that I found the most interesting is that resilience can be learned. And obviously we're all born with certain capacities and certain capabilities, but certain capacities to manage stress and manage change. But I always just considered it that's kind of who you are. And the more and more I've learned about this, the more pleased I am to know that resilience can be learned and that there's evidence of this. It's a skill, and I never thought about it as a skill. But like any other skill, you need to continually practice it to stay fit. It is about staying calm, and it's about evaluating things, so thinking about it rather than just reacting emotionally. And knowing that it's not a fixed trait, that you can become less resilient over time or you can become more resilient over time. And I kind of make a joke that, once you get old, people get more stubborn and less willing to change. And I think that's kind of a stereotype. But I also want, if you can learn resilience, you can also unlearn resilience. And that's why you need to continue to stay fit. An associate of mine has parents that are in their hundreds. And I find that just crazy that have two parents that are over 100 years old that are continually, of course, they're very active. And they're in their brains and how they behave, they're still being very resilient. So it's not just their bodies that are resilient, but their brains and how they think and how they react to things are also resilient. And sometimes we talk about being resilient and looking at things like a disaster or a very traumatic event. And I just want to challenge you in that thinking is that sometimes it's the day-to-day, the ongoing stress, and it might not be a huge amount. So if you talk about it, you feel kind of ridiculous. It's like, well, it isn't that bad. It's just that it's every day and it pounds on you and it wears you down. So just kind of like the wind or the water beating against the rocks. It's hard to be strong when you're being stressed all the time. I found this book and I thought it was kind of an interesting book. I haven't had a chance to read it other than to read kind of its summary and description. But it talks about lessons in leadership and how to be a first responder in business. And the main thing that they're talking about is training your mind to think as a first responder, to not let adversity define you, and how you might stay in charge of the situation. So looking at resilience as being a dynamic combination of being optimistic, being creative, and being confident. And thinking about this idea that your beliefs can help you thrive or not. You can take life's events and turn something into meaningful or making something more meaningful by focusing on the learning and not on the experience itself. And this is something that we're going to talk more about as well. As well as, how do you adapt? How you adapt to an event versus letting the event paralyze you. Can you recover from it and recover your original shape? And I'll say, come back stronger than you were before. I always think, they say anything, that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And it sounds, people say that all the time. But I think it's about learning, how, and you become more confident when you get through something that's difficult and you come through stronger than you were before. So when we're looking at the different characteristics or tenets of personal resilience, there was 3 of them that really kind of summarized everything. One had to do with challenge, that resilient people turn difficulties into a challenge, and rather than fighting it, they confront it. And they don't judge events, but they look to find meaning and lessons behind them. In other words, this happened. How can I grow from it? What can I learn from it? And how can it make me stronger? This idea of commitment, that you're committed to becoming a better person, that you want to get out of bed every morning, you have something to fight for, you enjoy your life, you enjoy what you're doing, and this gives you extra motivation, and you don't let obstacles derail you from what's important. And then this idea of self-control. You own your actions. You can't manage reality. You can't stop things from happening, but you can control how you react to those. So don't waste your energy playing the victim and try to focus on, rescuing yourself from the adversity. That's kind of the conclusion of talking about personal resilience, because I don't want this to become a psychological presentation, but I wanted you to understand that this is the basics of what we're talking about, that each person has to be considering their own strengths and weaknesses and what you bring to the table as an employee as well. And how you manage, if you're a manager or a leader in your organization, how do your personal attributes impact the people that work for you? So let's take a minute and take our first poll. And how resilient do you feel you are based on some of those characteristics?
We'll leave the poll open for a few more seconds here. We've got about half the folks responding. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll.
Well, interesting results. It's almost 50-50 here, given the usual polling things. But more than half of you feel that you're agile and adaptable and you embrace change, and the other half of you feel that you're moderately resilient and can manage change very well. I notice we focus kind of on change here for kind of the definitions behind it. And my guess is because that so many of you are in the business of managing change and confronting change and trying to protect your organizations from the risk side of whatever adversity that you might face, that this makes you stronger in this as well. So great. So the question then becomes, do you need a resilient workforce? I don't think this is a topic that people really talked about 10 years ago, and certainly in the era when I was first doing the job. It had nothing to do, my being hired for a job had to do with my physical skill sets, what I learned in school, what was my experiences and expertise. It had really nothing to do with who I was as a person, I don't think, other than did they kind of like you or not like you. So we're going to look at the relationship between resilience, stress, and competitive advantage. And this relationship makes it imperative that you understand how to increase the resilience of your workforce. Because the more resilient a workforce, the more they can handle heavy workloads, pressures, and major changes without becoming stressed out. And there are intellectual, emotional, and physical consequences of stress, and they directly compromise those sources of competitive advantage. By the way, each one of these slides will have a reference, and like I mentioned at the end, it will be a slide that has all of the references that we used and that you'll be able to take a look at once the webinar becomes live, and then you can go ahead and read those in more detail. And I would challenge you to do that. Just for we're able to only take the main ideas from each one of these papers and studies. So I would strongly recommend that you take a look at those afterwards. So kind of the questions. Do you need a resilient workforce? Well, are you concerned about how much healthcare benefits cost your company? Do increasing labor costs or competition from outside your country make it even more important for you to get maximum productivity from your employees? Does customer service quality play a major role in whether or not your company thrives? How about intellectual capital, the knowledge, wisdom, and innovative capacity of your workforce? Does this play a significant role in your ability to compete in the marketplace? Hard to say no to any of those things. Are you interested in keeping absenteeism and turnover costs down? Do you place a high priority on having a positive can-do workforce rather than a negative complain about everything collection of whiners? And, are you the whiner? Do you want to work with whiners? Probably not. Those are back in the day, everybody standing around the water cooler people. Do you believe you're in for some rocky times ahead? Rocky times come and go. 2008 was a big rocky time. And, sometimes it means that there's going to be challenges for everybody. And is it going to make it hard for you to focus on their jobs? We look at all of the, the natural disasters that are happening. If you were in California here in the United States during the recent wildfires and your whole town's gone, well, you're certainly not going to be focusing on your job anytime soon. Do you want your employees to respond to change with enthusiasm and determination rather than fear and resistance? So if you answered yes to any of these questions, of course, you need a resilient workforce. I always like this quote too, is tough times don't last, but tough people do. Resilient employees embody health on multiple levels. They avoid illness, they maintain productivity, and they operate with a mental toughness. They're a true asset. They really are the people that you want. These are the people that stick around, that are able to do more than what you expect them to do, and they actually help to nurture the other people in your company as well as the company itself. And this is something that when wellness has become a bigger and bigger topic in the workplace, and it's more and more encompassing both the physical and mental health territories. And this idea of resilience is becoming a growing focus for employers. So if you haven't heard about it at your company, look around and see what other companies are doing. And we'll give you a few examples here as well. Some of the traits of resilient employees is, the ability to not sweat the small stuff. And some people say it's all small stuff. But resilient people are the opposite of drama queens. They maintain their good cheer despite frustrations and hassles that are part of everyday work life. They perform under pressure when it is the big stuff. They don't become testy or sharp-tongued in difficult situations. They don't become unglued when confronted by high pressure. And these are the people that you can count on to come through when stakes are high. I have some family members that are really great day to day, but my goodness, when there's a crisis, they completely flip out and they can't think, they can't function. So it's really important that your employees can function not just during good times, but also during more difficult times. Are they able to respond flexibly and adapt to changing circumstances? And this is really, I think, one of the most important reasons to have a resilient workforce. This idea of being flexible and adaptive to changing circumstances is the definition of organizational resilience. It's also a definition for the people and your workforce. So looking at this idea, it's a big idea of being flexible, but resilient people respond resourcefully to change. Rather than fight change and hold on to old, outdated ways, they respond to change with confidence and flexibility. In day-to-day work life, if their current approach to a situation no longer works, they're able to quickly and gracefully adjust their plans without getting upset. And this is an interesting concept because the world is changing faster than ever before. And this idea, again, of bouncing back from defeat or disaster, the more quickly you can recover from a setback to make the best of new situations, become a new and improved version of yourself. You're not dwelling on your failures. You're not dwelling when somebody tells you no, or just dwelling on, bad things that have happened in the past. This ability to be able to move on. So if I was an employer, if you're looking at these 4 traits, think about the questions that you'd be asking when you're hiring and what kinds of recommendations you might be giving to HR when you're looking for people to fill particular roles that are high stress roles or roles that require people to manage during disasters or manage risk. So we're talking a minute about employee stress. Employees today are more than ever pressured to do more with less, and they feel the weight of looming layoffs or the threat of quickly spreading negative attention. This whole social media aspect, something negative gets out there and it's everywhere. Aside from the stress of what can happen at work, many employees are also pressured to stay constantly connected or plugged in. You're expected to answer emails. You're expected to answer your phone. It doesn't matter that, you're working, 8:30 to 4:30 or whatever your, quote, work hours are. You're expected to answer something immediately. And this really creates the risk for employee burnout because people are exhausted. I talked a minute ago about, it's not always the big problems. It's the constant hammering away and the constant stress that people feel. So there's a strong relationship between employee stress and competitive advantage. So one of the sources of competitive advantage is the ability to create brand-building customer experiences. And let's just face it, stressed out employees don't give great service, and they're much less likely to respond with patience and goodwill. They're short-tempered. Another competitive advantage is the organization's responsiveness or the ability to respond quickly to change, while stress creates a fear of anything new. A third competitive advantage is the idea of innovation and intellectual capital. Stress makes people dumber. They're not as creative, they're not as logical, and the source of stress dominates their thoughts. When you're looking at talent acquisition and retention, a high stress, human unfriendly workplace is not going to be a talent magnet. Great employees walk out the door. I've heard, you hear about companies where it's a great place to go to kind of learn the ropes, but everybody's out of there within 3 years because they can't take it. It's like, is that the kind of company you want to be with? And this idea of productivity per employee. Stressed out workers eventually burn out, and they do cost you in terms of increased turnover, mistakes made on the job, increased workman's comp claims, and health insurance premiums as well. So if you want to have fast, friendly, flexible, and focused people, you need to have those kind of people that help you achieve your goals. And so you need to know how to create a work experience and a work environment that fosters resilience. So one of the ways you can do that is to identify sources of unnecessary stress and remove as many of these sources as possible. And the other factor is this idea of control. And so the more control employees have over their own work, the more they can handle heavy workloads. When you have major organizational changes and difficult pressure without becoming stressed, if they feel like they're part of that, if they have some kind of sense of control of those things, it helps them to reduce the amount of stress. So one of the things you'll want to do is design as much control and autonomy into each job, which is going to help you to stress-proof your workforce. So one of the examples that they gave in this Forbes study, and we're going to talk a little bit, I don't know if your organization has done this or if you've heard about it, but we're talking about the agile workplace. And companies are talking about being more agile, and they're trying to implement agility, which is great, but you need to have agile people if you're going to have an agile workplace. So this media company has over 100,000 people, and they discovered when they looked at what was causing stress in their workforce that what was costing them the most money was actually stress, and that was causing them to cost money for them as far as the high absenteeism rate. So they already had programs for employee assistance, they had yoga, they had meditation, and they found that those were helpful, but it was really hard to do that because they had a lot of call center employees that weren't able to take advantage of that, and the high absenteeism of their call center employees was impacting their bottom line. So what they did next was they implemented a resilience program or a strategy that taught their employees to catch themselves when they started thinking negatively, to be able to step back and open their minds to alternative interpretations of a stressful situation. So they looked at it. You would think that would kind of go along with yoga and meditation, but what they were actually doing was teaching them how to manage negative thinking. They also learned how to manage their emotions, how to manage anxiety, how to set aside distractions, and then navigate around their negative reactions. These are all learnable skills. So we talked about personal resilience being something that you can become better at and that you can learn. And we talked about the fact that you need to be looking at the event itself and how you react to it and how you think about it. And these are the ways that they decided to manage the stress in their workplace. So I mentioned earlier that an agile workplace needs agile people. So are your current employees mentally and emotionally equipped with the personal resilience to work in an agile workplace? This idea of reinventing your companies to be agile teams and people working together as teams to help make a competitive advantage. If you're doing that, you're going to need to be looking at your people. Because resilience empowers employees and leaders to develop greater emotional intelligence and self-awareness. You hear a lot in the workplace now about emotional intelligence. It also helps people focus under pressure and manage their impulses and helps them to solve their problems more creatively. And these are really important building blocks for those agile teams that are trying to be implemented. So you must make sure that your employees can learn skills that make them act more adaptable, to help them to deal with stress, and also to remain emotionally connected to work. When you put out resilience programs or an overall resilience strategy, this enables all three of those things. And when leaders and employees embrace those skills, they found powerful things that can happen. So another example is a Fortune 50 company. They already have an award-winning healthy lifestyles practice, but because they're an information technology firm, their people are continuously assaulted by the speed of change. So they decided to put together a company-wide resilience initiative that focused on each individual developing personal skills according to their needs. And what they really found, which was not really that surprising, but it was still a little bit interesting, is that their tech people took a logic-based approach to this emotional challenge, and so they identified exactly what was causing them stress, and they tackled it head-on with a dispassionate analysis and new work styles. So they looked at things like handling difficult customer calls with emotion control, or dealing with work challenge with flexibility and focus. And this made them more self-aware and more adaptable. And so what they found was that their employees were learning to manage the relentless changes with more confidence. Remember also, we're talking about teams, and we're talking collaborating. You need to have a sense of collaboration amongst your teams. And this is part of this workforce agility that we're talking about as well. So personal agility strengthens when employees practice resilience and collaboration with a like-minded community. It's not something you do necessarily on your own, but working with teams of people to do it, or with your work group. And good teamwork is also mutually supportive. So having the social support is essential as well to that sense of well-being on the job. You want to work with people that you like and get along with as well. So getting people and your employees engaged in resilience training helps to develop a sense of community in two ways. First, in their team or department, these resilience exercises and activities build cohesiveness and trust. And then across the organization, if you implement resilience metrics, it gives everyone a picture of how the company as a whole is managing change as well, and makes them feel part of that change. So let's take our next poll, and we're going to focus here really on stress. To what extent does stress at work hamper your ability to perform at your best?
We've got about half the folks responding. We'll leave it open for a few more seconds here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll.
That's really interesting. It's almost like the perfect bell curve here. We've got, less than 20% of people feeling that it's really stressful, and less than 20% feeling that it's really relaxed, and everybody else is kind of in the middle. And that kind of makes sense, and it's probably more event-based, where there's certain times that are more stress than others, and that during those times it impacts, your ability to perform at your best. That's really interesting results. Thank you. So our last part of the webinar is going to be looking at designing a more resilient workforce. And there's 13 characteristics that came out from this Forbes study that was done back just about a year ago, or 2017 January, so it's almost 2 years ago now. I almost forget that 2018 is coming to a close. So you need to lead by example, and this is where you need to begin your resilience programs at the leadership level. People do what their leadership does, and their management team, whatever they're doing, is going to resonate amongst the employees. So it's really important to ensure that corporate leaders adopt a sense of personal resilience in the workplace. You need to foster a sense of purpose, making sure that your employees find meaning in the work that they do, and that they understand how important what their job does to the importance and the role of the company. When they see that what they're doing makes a difference to their company, they're going to be more invested. Also, promoting that sense of control. We talked about control earlier, as well as confidence amongst all your employees. Employees who feel they have control in their work are more resilient because they've learned to take ownership and exhibit pride in the work that they're responsible for. In other words, people don't like to be micromanaged either. And then looking, of course, at managing change. You need to ensure that your entire company views change as a welcome challenge rather than an unwelcome roadblock, because changes happen everywhere and they happen in every company. So those with a culture that supports change can more easily adopt resilience. And this idea of managing change, by the way, as being part of the culture of your organization is one that's a big topic with organizational resilience as well. This idea of encouraging connections, we talked about that just a minute ago, having that social support to foster a resilient corporate environment by providing employees with a group of people who can build them up when times are tough, to having that network and social support. We talked about needing to address stress levels, both individually and as a group. When you have a management team who can sense when tensions are running high, this can help employees avoid difficult situations as a group. This whole bounce back thing then wouldn't be so necessary. Of course, having a sense of humor is invaluable. When employees can laugh through difficult and challenging circumstances, they're much better off, and they can sail through challenges without being broken down. Sense of humor is huge. Just being able to look at things in a way that doesn't cause more stress. You've heard grittiness, I'm sure, in your past, this idea of mental toughness. And you can grow those traits and they can help you to become stronger. So the more grittiness you have also helps you to build stronger resilience. So help people to grow stronger mentally. Also provide opportunities for learning and professional development. It's really important that on a regular basis, employees are taught and reminded the best ways to embrace change and manage difficult situations. This is something that it's been a challenge, I would say, over the past 10 years, where companies have really cut back on learning and professional development in all areas, much less on the more personal side. Management also needs to be optimistic and use some positive messaging. You know, a positive work environment is one that begs for resilience, and the opposite is also true. So this idea of positivity, being optimistic, and they go hand in hand when it also comes to corporate health benefits and the cost with that and how much people need them. You should be encouraging flexibility and adaptability. It's not an option to crumble under pressure. And if you allow employees to get creative and find a way to push through challenging situations, they're going to become much stronger. Also use problem-solving skills. Both management teams as well as employees need to have skill sets that can be used in tough situations. So companies who merge the two can really help people solve problems effectively, and it also helps to build that team camaraderie. And of course, maintaining healthy habits both physically and mentally. As we talked about earlier, this healthy workplace and this idea of wellness, not just physically but also mentally, is becoming much more available at companies. And this all-encompassing view of health is really important. Excuse me. One of the things that the Smart Brief article had in it that we weren't going to be able to focus on a lot, because I wanted to keep this on a positive note on what you can do versus the things that really can stop the personal resilience and can stop the workforce resilience. But I wanted to talk about one of them, and this was the organizational complexity, this hierarchical approach where you have what I would call a very centralized management system where everybody's reporting and there's a lot of layers. It can also create a lot of stress on employees. And a survey that they did found 66% of the respondents complained of too great of organizational or procedural complexity. It takes a long time to get things done and a long time to get things approved. And when your hierarchical organization is very complicated, it also obstructs collaboration. It obstructs team empowerment. It obstructs flexibility and autonomy. And you're overburdening employees with processes that really don't directly support their efforts at work. And almost 3/4 of the respondents complained that excessive multitasking and an overload of meetings are also common. So when you have a lot of complexity, you also have a lot more meetings. One of the things that a lot of companies do is mentoring. But a suggestion also as an outcome of this article was that doing this two-way mentoring where you pair the traditional way of pairing a more experienced individual with a newer employee is pretty common. But also looking at this practice of two-way mentoring, which can be also multi-generational. So putting a more experienced employee who can share institutional knowledge, tips learned through the years of experience, and those practical skills is important. But also a less experienced employee might share tips on how to use new technology, new suggestions for workflow, as well as they might bring different attitudes and values. One of my kids actually is working for a company where they do some mentoring. And one of the interesting things is that she's been bringing to the table ways to do some things that they've been doing for years very manually, to automate those things so that the people can actually do more interesting work. And so while she's learning about the company, they're learning about how to maybe work more efficiently. And beyond linking employees from different generations, it really helps your culture of your organization to encourage mentoring across departments. And if you're in the business continuity space, we talk about job sharing or cross training and all of those things. This two-way mentoring can be really used and implemented to help with your business continuity efforts as well. So looking at this relationship between veteran employees and newly hired managers, for example, and this idea of passing on institutional knowledge is really, really helpful as well. And if you have people, maybe you have a workforce where you have a lot of people retiring, you don't want to lose the historical knowledge of your company either. Some of the advantages to the organization is that you can have a workforce that can thrive in an environment of continuous change and that you're poised to create real competitive advantage. And they're able to adapt faster and you can do things for less money and they're better than your competitors, which also is a great advantage to this competitive environment. And this idea of continuous change ceases to be debilitating. It really becomes a fuel for continuous performance improvement. You see in every management system standard this idea that you're supposed to have continual improvement. Well, you can't have a continual improvement without change. So let's take our last poll. To what extent has your organization begun implementing strategies to increase the resilience of its workforce?
Responses are coming in here. We'll be closing the poll in a few seconds.
Well, this is interesting too. When I talked about the questions pane, because we have a limited time for kind of the sharing today, what I would suggest is that for that 30% of you that have actively implemented strategies, if you could share that in the questions pane, and if you're willing to have us share it with everybody in the group, I think that would be really helpful. And even those 48% of you that say you have that they've implemented a few strategies, share the things that are being done at your company. And so I would love to be able to share that with everybody. And then there's of course this group that a little less than 25% that doesn't think they have any idea. And I don't think that's a horrible thing because I think this is a newer concept and something that we need to look at in the future. What I wanted to finish up with today was just to show you a study that was done a little over a year ago from Harvard Business Review. And they looked at really this culture of resilience and resilient organizations. So the question for this first one is, in your view, how successful is your organization in promoting a culture of resilience? And you see that very successful was only 2%, successful about 10%, and moderately successful. So less than 50% felt that there was any sort of success there. And if you were to face a challenge today, how confident are you in your workforce's capacity to absorb it without experiencing burnout? And these numbers were a little bit better, moderately confident to very confident. But now specifically looking at skill building and employee development, what the first bar, the turquoise bar here, looks at how important they thought these topics were. And then the execution is the bottom bar, the darker one. So allowing adequate time for continuous learning and skill building was very important, but only implemented about 26% of the time. Adopting technology that automates routine or non-productive work is being implemented about 34% of the time. Providing employees with reasonable flexibility to pursue different career paths or field of interest, about 30%. I found this one really interesting. If you're talking about trying to keep your employees, one of my kids works for a company where the people don't leave, but they change jobs. They move laterally. They want to stay with the company, but they want to change their jobs. To me, if you can provide this for your company and for your employees, this is a huge benefit. I'm using self-assessments to maintain awareness of employees' strengths or weaknesses. I found it interesting that 33% of companies were actually doing this. I thought it would be less. Creating formal mentoring programs is about 31%. And placing new hires in high-performing teams seems like a great idea. But only, about 21% of companies were actually doing it. Addressing this idea of overload, to what extent do the following challenges exist? 72% felt that there was too many meetings, too many decision-making modes, that there's excessive multitasking, that you've got unnecessary organizational or procedural complexity was about 66%. And this idea of a lack of downtime to recover from periods of high stress, and then this idea of volume and pace of work make it difficult or impossible to keep up. You feel like you're always behind. The next one down was office politics, just people being painful. And then the last one, volume and pace of work make it difficult to maintain personal health, was almost a half. So if you look at the volume and pace of work making it difficult to keep up and then impacting your personal health, were closely related. This idea of a risk-taking culture, and I don't mean this to be like being risky. What they're talking here is about being able to, if you're going to be advocating change and adaptability and being agile, you have to take some risks. So here they thought it was very important, if you're going to have people working in teams, to empower them to make decisions on their own, but only 30% of companies actually allowed them to do that. Creating a culture where it's safe for employees to try new things and take risks, only 18% were able to do that. And then if you have teams and you're supposed to be having them do work, letting them address challenges was much higher, which I thought was interesting. But instilling that sense of autonomy in employees was still pretty low at 34%, which kind of goes with empowering teams to make decisions on their own. This idea of reducing organizational complexity of their hierarchies and silos was really low, 14%. And being able to celebrate failures as part of the innovation and change process, I thought that was really sad. We're supposed to be learning from the challenges and learning from our mistakes. And if you're only doing that 7%, that really is sad. Moving on to work-life balance. If you're trying to hire people in their 20s and 30s, they're going to be talking about work-life balance. And this is something that we think that that's being shown that companies are getting better at. So providing a comfortable working environment is pretty decent. Providing work time flexibility is not bad. Workplace flexibility is a little bit lower, but this could be that, the job that you have to be at work to do it. Establishing and promoting health and wellness initiatives looks like it's in pretty good shape. Promoting awareness and mitigating what they call presenteeism, people there but not actually doing anything. And then discouraging this working beyond normal hours is still really low. That one is a sad state. They're asking us to do more and expecting you to do it outside of work hours. And then looking at building an enterprise-wide culture of resilience, encouraging levels of all leaders to model resilience, including support for employee autonomy and risk-taking. Again, that's kind of a repeat question there, very low. Structuring compensation to align with an organization's values and ethical standards was pretty low. Incorporating measures of resilience into performance feedback. Well, if you're going to be asked to perform in a certain way, it should be part of your feedback as well. Minimizing disruption to employees due to continuous change, lots of mergers and acquisitions, structural reorgs, changes in your business model, and of course, always this technology change. Companies are not doing much with that. And then including employee resiliency as a topic in exit interviews, hardly done at all. So just to finish up for today, I just want to challenge you that as an employee, it's your responsibility to be agile and adaptable at work. And employers, you need to implement strategies to reduce stress in the workplace and increase your employees' ability to manage change. Because employers who implement these strategies to increase the resilience of its workforce will increase their organization's resilience overall and their competitive advantage. I wanted just to announce that we're really excited to be offering new ways to be certified as an organizational resilience manager, professional, or executive. So we are now going to be offering within the first quarter of 2019 our instructor-led courses, followed by the e-learning courses. So watch for more information coming on that. As I mentioned, we had a lot of references here. These were the 7 top references that we used. And our last webinar of 2018 will be on reputation management on December 12th. This webinar ran a week late because of Thanksgiving, and this one will run a week early because of the holiday schedule. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Again, please send in your questions, and we will reply to all of those. You will get a certificate of attendance, and the webinar will be available either at the end of the week or early next week on our website. Thank you very much.